Live in 5.
Evening, everybody. Thanks for joining the public consultation event, the first event in relation to the Carlton Masterplan Framework. I'm hoping that some of you will have seen the material already on the website. So we're just going to run through that again, just for anybody that's not. And then there's an opportunity for questions at the end. So I'll just hand on to Katie now.
Right. Hello everyone, my name's Katie Sutton, so I'm a consultation specialist from Arup and supporting Barnsley Council on this project. I'm going to run through the format of this event tonight, and then I'll run through these ground rules that you can see on your screen right now. But basically this is a live event, so that means that there's many people on this call, and the aim of this type of call is to capture as many people as possible and to allow you guys to ask questions. There will be some topical sessions as well further down the line. Next week and the week after, there's a movement event, environment event, and then urban design event. And those are a bit more of an open meeting, so you can ask questions and go back and forth with the specialists on the call. So if you do have any further questions following this live event, please do join one of those topical sessions, and you can book into those on the Carlton web page. So running through these ground rules, all the attendees are muted during this live Q&A, and following this, so what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a presentation, so running through kind of 15 minutes, the materials that you will have already seen, hopefully, and then the floor is yours really, and it's open to you for questions, but feel free to start sending in questions now if you do have any questions right now. To participate, all you need to do is look at that Q&A panel on the right side of your screen, and you can submit a question either using your name, or you can post it anonymously as well. Any questions using inappropriate language will not be answered. And then also, due to GDPR, we ask that you don't record this session yourself. The event's being recorded and we'll make it available to you as well on the Barnsley web page. If there's any technical issues, you can leave the event and then drop back into it, and that tends to solve most issues. But if you do have any kind of issues that persist, please do just drop it into the chat and we'll try and sort it out, or we can follow up with you after this session as well. If you have any further info or any questions, please do email the master planning inbox at the barnsley.gov.uk email address. So with us today are some of the project team members preparing this draft master plan framework. So Stacey, who's the project manager from Barnsley Council. We've had Joe, who just spoke. He's the head of planning at Barnsley Council. And then we have Millie, who is the assistant project manager from our side. And then Susie, who is leading on the transport and movement. Yang Yi, who's leading on environment. And then Chris, who's leading on the urban design work. So over to you, Joe, to just explain what a master plan framework is.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. So every council is required by government to produce a local plan, and that plan has to meet future needs, economic needs, housing needs, and obviously strive to achieve sustainable development, having regard to a whole range of environmental considerations. Knowing that government required us to produce a local plan, and if an authority doesn't have a local plan in place, the government effectively penalises them for that through something called the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and what planners would call a tilted balance, which basically means if you haven't got a plan in place and you don't quite like a proposal, but you're not sure you've got strong enough grounds to refuse it, then the government would expect you to approve it, basically. So it's a subtle difference if you don't have a plan compared to when you do have a plan, in terms of the extent to which you can control development within your area. So Barnsley, like most authorities, has got a plan in place. Our plan was adopted in 2019, and that was following a 2-year public examination where there were a number, probably about 20 hearing sessions, which were kind of round tables with the planning inspector, where on one side of the table you got landowners and developers saying Barnsley needs more growth, you need more sites, I've got a site, I'd like to consider my site. Then you've got pressure groups and others saying that actually we don't like your plan, we think that you're planning for too much growth, or we don't like this particular site. And then the council was there, obviously seeking to justify the plan that we prepared. So after that process, after that couple of year process, an independent planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State decided that the Barnsley local plan was sound and could be adopted and would be used for decision making in Barnsley to help us determine planning applications. And that plan includes sites for development, but it also includes a raft of other policies that help us to assess planning applications in relation to things like biodiversity, pollution control, traffic, the whole host of issues that you would expect. One of the things that the planning inspector said was, and we agreed, was that because there were some quite large sites in the local plan, that these ought to be subject to what we refer to as a master plan framework. And the reason for that was that these were large sites that were often in multiple ownership. And what we were seeking to avoid was a scenario where individual landowners would do a deal with a developer, seek to bring forward their site without having any real consideration for how it might fit in with the rest of the land that's allocated and what the cumulative impacts might be of all that development on local infrastructure, local residents, the environment, etc. So this process is not about whether or not this site should be developed. As I've said previously, that decision was taken 2 years ago when that planning inspector found the Barnsley local plan sound. It's about working with yourselves and others to look at how it might best be developed, having regard to the things that we know about and the things that we're interested to learn about through this consultation. So you'll see there on the slide that obviously we consult on planning applications and we'll consider development proposals in detail. We've done the local plan. This is kind of the second of a three-stage process, if you like. So I'll just hand on now to Chris, who's going to talk about some of the content of the framework.
Thank you, Joe. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Hi, I'm Chris from Gillespie's, Chris Wong. I'm an urban designer. So this slide shows you the emerging vision statement for this development in Carlton, and we welcome your feedback and any questions. Happy to discuss that later. So this emerging vision says that this development will be a cluster of sustainable communities. The key point is that we are still hoping to retain as much of Wharncliffe Woodmoor as possible and keeping it as the key community green space. And obviously we are going to aim at offering high quality housing, diverse neighborhoods, pedestrian and cyclist-friendly environments, as well as integrating it with the surrounding rich green and blue infrastructure. For example, such as Carlton Marsh Nature Reserve, as well as Barnsley Canal, the existing National Cycle Network, and all the nearby local centres of Royston and Cutsworth. And to the right, we have a diagram showing you 7 placemaking principles that help shape this master plan framework. And I'm happy to go through any questions you have on those as well later. Next slide, please. Millie, pass on to you.
Thanks, Chris. So if you've checked out the online consultation materials, you can would have been able to read this in detail, but just to give a quick summary, I guess our main constraints on the site are related to some of the previous uses on the site where there have been shallow and deep mining and landfill. So there are some potential ground constraints where there have been shallow minings and the deep minings and some contamination. There's also some steep topography, and then all the boundaries with the roads, the railway lines and the industrial sites in and around Carlton. But there's also a lot of opportunity with this site. There's Wharncliffe Woodmoor, which is really quality neighbourhood green space and areas of significant ecological value, which we want to retain and enhance and preserve, and we want to connect create wildlife corridors from Wharncliffe Woodmoor to Carlton Marsh, which is a triple SI site. There's also lots of great opportunity to promote active travel and implement green infrastructure to create safe travel routes and also connect up to the Transpennine Trail and the cycle network. There's also opportunity to expand Carlton Primary School for the local community. And there's also some heritage in the Carlton Conservation Area, so we want to make sure that we reflect all this local heritage and character. Can I hand over to Chris, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Millie. So back to me, this slide shows you where we are with the master plan framework. And as mentioned previously, happy to go through any questions you have on where we are with this framework. So this plan shows you the main direction of the framework at the moment is proposing around or just under 2,000 new homes and a small local shop just to the south of Shore Lane, if you can see my cursor, and also a 210 pupil expansion to Carlton Primary Academy right here. And it's proposing a couple of, to be exact, 3 sustainable and distinctive neighborhoods, one to the south of Carlton Centre, one to the north and south of Shore Lane here, and another one close to Cutsworth to the south. And the main goal for this master plan framework, as mentioned earlier, is to preserve and enhance as much of Wharncliffe Woodmoor as possible as a community green space. We are also proposing a new community garden where the former Carlton allotment is located. And at the same time, we are proposing to enhance the existing national cycle routes and to propose to divert a specific section of it to where it's currently in poorer quality, and also to go through a residential neighborhood with better residential frontage. We are also proposing to enhance Church Streets and also Fishdam Lane and create a strong green gateway into the new developments, where we're proposing a strong sustainable residential connection from this neighborhood towards the Shore Lane neighborhood, and potentially connecting back to Royston as well. And at the same time, we are proposing to establish a wildlife corridor to the east towards Carlton Marsh Nature Reserve, which we will go through further in the biodiversity section later. And also, throughout the whole master plan, we're proposing green buffers that help mitigating air and noise pollution, for example, from industrial sites, as well as from the railway line. Next slide, please. Next slide, we have urban design and character. So it shows you what we are thinking in terms of the strategy of establishing a strong urban design framework in the sites. To start off with, we are hoping to create a green gateway along Fishdam Lane and also Church Street into the developments. On both sides of this gateway, as you can see, we're hoping to establish strong and well-designed residential frontage along the streets, and all the way continuing up to Shore Lane, where a primary gateway will be established with a small new local shop. As mentioned previously, we are also planning to propose a new community garden, and together with some of the existing heritage exits, for example, these historic railway arches, they can become strong placemaking focal points. And at the same time, we are proposing to enhance and preserve Wharncliffe Woodmoor as a community green space. So we would be proposing some new footpaths and also recreational trails that allow strong viewing opportunities from the high points of Wharncliffe Woodmoor into the surroundings. And to the text to the right, we are parallel to this consultation, we are developing a design code which aim to set out the design principles and guidelines for future applications. So any questions and any ideas from you regarding what should go into this design code, we're happy to discuss and go through later as well. Okay, next slide, please. To you, Susie.
Hi there, thank you. Yeah, so this slide sets out the movement strategy, which is based on a hierarchy of routes which prioritises walking, cycling and public transport over motor vehicles. And we aim to provide for and encourage sustainable travel and reduce the reliance on and the impact of the private car. So the proposals retain and enhance existing public rights of way through the site, such as the routes through Wharncliffe Woodmoor and adjacent to the railway line on the eastern boundary, and then new routes for pedestrians and cyclists, as well as sort of recreational trails through the green spaces are proposed. The new and existing active travel routes provide pedestrian and cycle provision through the site and connect with existing routes surrounding the site to link to communities and amenities nearby, including Carlton, Cudworth, Monkbretton and Royston, all within sort of walking and cycling distance, as well as the sort of to the green spaces such as Carlton Marsh Nature Reserve. And these routes are for pedestrians and cyclists segregated away from vehicular routes through the site, so to provide an accessible, safe and attractive environment for everybody. The Transpennine Trail through the site, which is shown in pink, is retained with improvements proposed and slightly amended alignment through the central area of the site, and this will provide an improved route for pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders as currently. The vehicular accesses will provide routes for bus services into the site. It's anticipated that this would be sort of diverting and increasing the frequency of existing services that currently run between Barnsley and Royston via Church Street and Fishdam Lane, and services running along Barnsley Road or Burton Road to the south could potentially divert into the site also. And one more thing to note on this one is the indicative location for a potential new rail station on the railway line to the east. And there's feasibility work going on at the moment to consider opening the current freight line, opening it to passenger services between Wakefield and Barnsley. And this would include new rail station somewhere in this site. So the location's not been determined, but space will be safeguarded in the master plan for it. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So the highway proposals currently comprise two access options. They're broadly the same, other than option A, the one to the left, shows a northern access link road which would tie into the Carlton Royston link road, which is a strategic route ambition for the council. The local plan allocation required access to the main site from the roundabout on West Greenway to the south. However, following our analysis of the site, the master plan aims to retain as much as Wharncliffe Woodmoor as possible. Therefore, we've not put highway route access through it. There will be some small accesses from West Greenway to the residential area to the south. The main highway access is going to be from Fishdam Lane to the west into the MU2 site and to the east into the MU3 site. And there are accesses also proposed from Shore Lane to the residential parcels north and south of Shore Lane. So the current proposals are based on the understanding that there are existing capacity and congestion issues with the junction of Church Street and Shore Lane. Therefore, we've shown a highway connection through the site linking Shore Lane with Fishdam Lane behind the Premier Foods site, so that this traffic can use this route rather than go through the congested junction. But we are in the process of undertaking more detailed traffic modelling of the Church Street Shore Lane junction to test this and consider highway improvements where feasible. So that's it from me in terms of the movement strategy. Next slide, and pass on to Yanyi.
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Yanyi. I am an ecologist at Arup. So in terms of biodiversity, the Masterplan Framework looks to retain and enhance the majority of Wharncliffe Woodmoor, which has been outlined by Chris already. We are proposing some enhancement measures, so this may include things like additional planting of native species to woodland areas or creation of native hedgerows and trees, providing additional connectivity throughout the site. In addition, the habitats within the site that have been identified to have high biodiversity value have actually been retained within the Masterplan Framework. And this information was informed by surveys undertaken previously to inform the local plan, as well as an ecological site survey undertaken to help inform the master plan itself. Thanks. Next slide, and over to Millie.
Thanks, Yanyi. Just a really quick slide on the delivery and phasing. So this is still being developed, but the parcels that are numbered are different parcels that can be delivered separately. The numbering isn't in order, so they don't necessarily need to be delivered in the numbers that are given. But we're working with the landowners, and once the master plan's set after the consultation, then we will look at how these will be delivered and set that out in a delivery strategy. Thank you very much, Katie. Is that over to you?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys. So just a quick summary from me about the feedback and the next steps. So just a reminder that the feedback period is still open. So if you haven't submitted your feedback, please do. You have until the 28th of July to do that. You can complete the questionnaire online at the Carlton website, and then you can also send in any questions to the master planning email address. So we're looking to have the master plan framework proposals refined and ready for council approval by late 2021. So that's it. That's all we're going to present to you guys, and really we'll start running through the questions that you have sent in. Before I do that, I just want to send a quick reminder to you that there are some topical discussions. So there's one on the 7th of July for movement, the 8th of July for urban design, and the 14th of July for environment. And I've been reading through the questions that have been coming in, and maybe some of those questions would be beneficial of going back and forth with a specialist in that area. But we'll go ahead and start the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and run through these. So at the top of the list, this is a question about from George about the Model Aircraft Club, and they currently use a site on Fishdam Lane. Would like to talk to the council about providing the club with a relocation to suitable site. Joe or Stacey, I think that one's for you.
I can take this one, Katie. Yeah, so Mr. Stedman, the Model Aircraft Club's already been in touch with the council about this issue, and we understand that there'll be some worry about sort of competing uses on the site as development starts to come forward. So I'm happy to take up the discussion offline with the Model Aircraft Club to explore with park services whether we can find an alternative site that can be used potentially. So I'm happy to make contact with you. I do already have your contact details. Thank you.
Okay. So the next couple of questions about the local plan are kind of related to policy and local plan. And then there's a comment about environmental policy. So Yanyi, if you want to come in after, maybe Joe runs through the local plan process and the consultation that took place then. Is that all right, Joe?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, as I alluded to before, there was a raft of evidence presented to that independent planning inspector who needed to be satisfied that the plan was sound, having regard to all relevant legislation and national government policy and guidance. So in terms of things like biodiversity, we did ecological surveys for every every site that was allocated in the local plan, and that helped us to understand which parts of that site shouldn't be developed. Then from that you can kind of ascertain the numbers that you might expect on each bit of land. So obviously you've got across MU2 and MU3 you've got approaching 1900 homes. That could have been higher had we not made allowances for some of the more environmentally sensitive, higher value ecological areas. We discounted them in effect when devising those what we call yields. So in terms of everything you could possibly think of, whether that be brownfield land, empty properties, availability of units elsewhere in even the wider region, not just in Barnsley, because in effect the plan required us to go into the green belt, we had to convince that planning inspector that we'd explored all of the options prior to arriving at that particular point. And in terms of Carlton in particular, so the MU2 site, people might not be aware that that site was actually allocated in the unitary development plan for housing development, and that was back in 2000. I think somebody suggested that there might, certainly in previous meetings I've been at, that there may be some challenges in bringing that site forward. And I think, yeah, it's not necessarily going to come forward straight away, but it wasn't in the green belt. It had been allocated in the last plan. You're therefore going to look at that as one of the first sites to allocate in the next plan before looking at the green belt. Similarly, the land in the southeast corner of the site, that wasn't in the green belt. That again, that was identified at the very start of the local plan process as a site allocation. The land that came in later on during the local plan was the land on the north side of Shore Lane, which was in the green belt, and the land on the south side of Shore Lane, where the former Carlton Colliery was. Again, that wasn't in the green belt. So we went through a process of considering all the environmental constraints on land in question, trying to squeeze as much of the development out of the existing settlements and non-green belt land, and only then did we have to start looking at green belt land. And of course, no planners want to do that. You know, you want to try and avoid going into the green belt where possible. Firstly, because we see it makes it much more difficult for you to do your job and get a plan adopted. But secondly, it's much more emotive, and we're not wanting to in effect create tension with local communities in meeting future needs if we can avoid that. But as I say, the government does require us to plan to meet future needs, and those are needs from people that probably aren't born yet. Some of the houses that will get built on Carlton, you know, there'll be various generations living in them in the future. And similarly, we all probably benefit in some ways from houses built in previous generations that were probably quite difficult decisions for planners at that time to take. So really just wanting to emphasise as much as possible that whilst the questions around the local plan process and did you do this, did you do that, we fully understand why you want to ask those questions. We just want to be really transparent that this process is not about revisiting that. It's about this being your opportunity to say what you would like included within this framework to help us control development, minimise impacts on the community, minimise impacts on the environment, and look at what opportunities that we can potentially exploit. So, for example, if people feel that actually we've got good green space in the area already that needs a bit of investment, well, we can look at, do we want to divert more resources to invest in existing green spaces and perhaps less so on the site itself? Conversely, people might have a different view and say, actually, the thing that we're really missing in Carlton on a green space is this, and it seems a good opportunity to actually take advantage of that at Wharncliffe Woodmoor. So I would just urge people to really focus on this being effectively decided in terms of the site as an allocated site, and to then look at, you know, what you think we can include in that framework to make sure that developers take on board the views of the community.
Thanks, Joe. Then Yanyi, can you run through the environmental bit of that question about current environmental policy?
Yeah, that's fine. So I understand that a similar question had been raised, and I understand it was about the biodiversity action plan, and that actual document doesn't actually belong to BNBC, but it actually belongs to Barnsley Biodiversity Trust. So but the council did adopt it as part of the evidence base for the local plan. And whilst it has been raised by the Trust about updating that actual BAP, or the Biodiversity Action Plan policy document, it hasn't actually been updated thus far, and therefore BNBC are then using the most current version of the BAP document for their local plan. But in terms of the actual any form of development that is put forward to the local planning authority, the local planning authority requires developers to submit up-to-date ecological data in accordance with recommended guidelines as standard planning requirements. And the current policies require a no net loss of biodiversity, but the master plan framework will actually be requiring a minimum of a 10% net gain as well. So whilst the local BAP is out of date, it's not a document that is that actually belongs to BNBC, and that's owned by the Barnsley Biodiversity Trust.
Could I just come in?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, just to be aware that the government has got an environmental bill that will be going through Parliament in the next 12 months, and that will require local nature recovery strategies to be produced. Now, what they're saying at the minute is the geography for that should be at the very least what's referred to as combined authorities. So the relevant combined authority for Barnsley is South Yorkshire Combined Authority. So we're working with the local nature partnership to start collecting data and evidence and undertaking mapping to establish what the baseline position is across South Yorkshire, and that will then help us to build a strategy for nature recovery across the South Yorkshire area, which then can then be implemented at that local level by the local authorities, either through our own projects, through working with partners, or help us in terms of determining planning applications. And as I said, just to emphasise again, we are looking for 10% biodiversity net gain as part of this master plan framework. Now, the way that is done is that DEFRA has a metric. It's kind of like a scoring system, if you like, whereby you look at a site, so the Carlton Masterplan area, it's attributed a score for the habitats that are on there, and that will have regard to the size of those habitats and the quality of them and a whole range of other issues. And then you have regard to the impact of the development and what might be lost as a result of the development, and you will lose credits for anything that's impacted by the development. You then have to come up with a package of mitigation and compensation to recover those lost credits, but not only recover them, but provide another 10% in credits. So the situation at Hoyland, for example, we've got mitigation that is difficult because at the minute you're not going to see it until actually the development itself is complete, but there's going to be a range of on-site habitat creation, woodland planting, and then there's going to be off-site measures. So again, we're interested in views on what the mitigation and compensation should be, but in the context of the council being very firm that it will have to deliver 10% net gain, and that will follow an accepted process that's used across the country. We use specialists to advise us on that. So again, any views on that are greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Joe. Right. Next question is about biodiversity. So it's not just about biodiversity, it's about human lives, and there's too much pollution as it is. So Barnsley Council, can you explain why this plan is going to make it worse? So Yang, could you run through a bit about the biodiversity kind of proposals? And maybe Stacey or Joe might jump in there as well, but I think we can start there.
Yeah, so I think like Joe's just said, because the master plan framework will be adopting biodiversity net gain, and it will be a minimum of 10% as well. In terms of any development that comes forward, they will have to deliver a 10% net gain. So that aspect of biodiversity will be coming through. And then, like I said in the presentation, the the master plan framework design was based on previous surveys of the site that helped inform the local plan as well, identifying areas of high ecological value within the site, and those areas have been retained within the master plan framework.
Great. Okay. Anything else to add, or I'll move on to the next question, looking at the time. So there's massive. Go on, Stacey.
Just to cover next part of question off relative to impact to development in terms of air pollution and that sort of thing. I think it's important to draw people's attention to the local plan at this point and the whole raft of policies that we've got in the local plan that seeks to protect residential amenity. So we've got air quality policies, for example, green space policies. Obviously, this master plan framework is trying to sort of help shape development and set out the basic principles that are going to be applied to development on this site. But the master plan framework, once adopted, shouldn't be read in isolation from the local plan. It's almost supplementary to. So at the point that we get planning applications submitted for development proposals on the site, then there's a whole raft of technical documents that we expect planning applications to be supported by, which includes things like air quality assessments, which will have to satisfy us that the impact are not such that it's going to impact on amenity in the area. If there is any impact, then we will require developers to demonstrate how those impacts are going to be mitigated. So it's not something that we're not continuing to consider throughout the sort of life cycle of the local plan, then onto the master plan framework, and then at the point that we receive a planning application on the site. Thank you.
Thanks. So next question, there are massive issues relating to MU2. We know the massive land faults that lay under the land. How will you address these? Millie, is this one for you about structural and ground surveys?
Yes, I can take that one. Thank you. Yes, so we are aware that there has been shallow mining taking place previously the north of MU2 site. So this is something we've highlighted in our analysis of the site, and any landowners or developers, so any developers bringing forward that site will need to do a ground investigation to understand exactly how the impact of the previous mining on any development, and do any mitigation to make sure that it's that can be brought forward. Stacey, I don't know if you need to add anything else to that, but
I think that covers it, Millie. Thanks. Urban design question, Chris. So how do you explain the freight railway track? Maybe it's not urban design, actually might be Susie. How do you explain the freight railway track going straight through the proposed development off West Greenway? Shall we pull up the master plan framework real quick? Oh, 2 seconds. Right. So we're looking at West Greenway.
Yeah, down to the south. I can pick this one up.
Yeah, brill. Thanks.
Well, I mean, other than to say it's an existing rail line that does go through the site, so there will be the sort of the parcels to the southeast corner will be separated from other parts of the site, but they'll have a separate access, highway access, and you know, the pedestrian and cycle routes within that area of the site. So we're not, yeah, it's an existing rail line. We're not changing that.
Chris, anything to add?
Yes. If I can add my response to your question from an urban design point of view. So I think the railway line, good point from Susie, is an existing railway line. We're not proposing a extension of that line into the residential neighborhood. And from my point of view, I think railway line shouldn't really become a barrier that stops the growth of neighborhoods. There are benefits to neighborhoods on the other side of the railway line. Considering it's much closer to Wharncliffe Woodmoor, you can actually maximize your accessibility as well as frontage onto this community green space, and all having better accessibility to the national cycle network as well. So there are definitely obvious benefits to proposing neighborhoods closer to these green assets. And at the same time, we will be proposing generous green buffers and setback from the railway line in case of any potential pollution. Up to we're talking about in this drawing, I think we have to consider scale as well. It looks quite kind of narrow setback, but actually in real physical scale, it will be up to higher than 10 meters setback. So all these level of details will be further set out in the design code. And of course, we welcome your feedback and comments as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So Susie, there's a question here about cyclists and pedestrians, and then about this strain on infrastructure. And then there's a bit about pollution as well, but wondering, I think there's another question about down a bit further about infrastructure issues and Burton Road. I was wondering if you could run through kind of transport modelling and that kind of matter subject. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, this is a development of almost 2,000 homes. So there will be a certain amount of new cars and additional traffic associated with that. What we want to do with the master plan is try and provide for residents to have cars. We also want to maximise the potential for walking, cycling, and for using buses and potentially rail services as well. So we're providing for all of those, but obviously there will always be people that want to, that own cars and that want to or need to drive. So in terms of the impact, as part of the local plan, there was detailed traffic modelling on the sort of the wider highway network, looking at the impact of the local plan sites for allocation, and that was accepted as part of the local plan process. So the additional traffic has been considered, but there will be more work. So as part of any future planning application that comes forward, there'll be detailed transport assessment that's required, and it would look at the traffic impact and the measures by sustainable modes as well, and it will look at the traffic impact and identify potential issues and look at mitigation measures, highway improvement if needed. There'll also be, as part of the planning process, there's a travel plan that's developed that will set out measures to try and discourage people from using the car and to encourage people to walk and cycle and use public transport. And there's usually a certain amount of the commitment and funding that goes alongside that to really promote sustainable travel. So while I acknowledge there will be some traffic impacts, the detailed planning process will look to minimise those impacts as much as possible.
Thanks, Susie. Next question. This is about the benefit to the existing community, and there's an existing community green space as well, and then talking about land ownership. Barnsley don't own MU3, so the impact on that. Stacey, could you run through that question, please?
Yeah, so I'll start off on land ownership issue. So yeah, much of the site is in private ownership. Part of it is in BNBC ownership. Firstly, as part of local plan process, we had to demonstrate that sites that we were proposing for allocation were available for development, and that means that we had to provide evidence that the landowners had either put the sites forward or were in agreement that they were going to be allocated for development. And in developing master plan framework as well, landowners have also been involved in master plan development at key stages of the sort of evolution at master plan, and will continue to be thereafter. So the landowners are fully aware of the proposals and will continue to be moving forward. In terms of green space question, I think it's in part being covered in previous responses, in terms of sort of explaining how we've got to where we are in terms of the proposals in trying to maximise the amount of Wharncliffe Woodmoor that we're retaining within the master plan framework, accepting that there will be some loss of green space, but the policy position in terms of the local plan policy for the site set out clearly what the most important areas of the site were in terms of ecological value. And also we appreciate that Wharncliffe Woodmoor as well has got a lot of recreational value as well, and people really value it for that. So that's why, as part of this proposal, that we're proposing to maximise the retention of Wharncliffe Woodmoor as much as possible, because we appreciate that value that it has for people locally. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, the next question is about the SSSI and its potential impact on any railway line. So phase 1 offshore lane has a heritage path through the middle, not included on any maps. Expensive houses next door to a 24/7 scrapyard, will they be forced to close down too? Yang, could you cover the bit about the SSSI and the impact on the SSSI? And then we'll need somebody else to kind of cover off the second bit of that question.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think, as the guys have already said, so it's not actually going to be a new railway line, it is an existing railway line. And as I said previously as well, any development that comes forward will have to undertake detailed ecological surveys, and that would undertake what we call a preliminary ecological appraisal, where you assess the site for the habitats that are currently there and what those habitats, what species those habitats might support, and then you would undertake further surveys where required. And then as part of that, you also assess any potential impact on statutory and non-statutory sites. So a SSSI is a statutory site, so you'd be looking at what kind of impacts any the proposed development would have on that SSSI. So that kind of impact will be covered off in any detailed development or planning application that comes forward. Yeah, I think that's answered. So if someone else wants to answer the rest of the question.
Yeah, in terms of the relationship between new houses and existing, whether it be the sources of noise, so whether that be the railway line, the scrapyards or Premier Foods, we've obviously been speaking to Premier Foods as part of this process, and their response to the consultation is clearly going to be important in terms of whether we stick with what's shown on the current proposals. But yeah, I mean, for a planning application for any residential next to an existing noise source, there would be a noise assessment undertaken to look at whether that noise source was exceeding prescribed limits, and if the introduction of houses created a problem because of the decibel levels. Similarly for railway lines, and we have assessments in relation to vibration. It's conscious it's just a freight line at the minute that's used perhaps once a week, with the sand being delivered to the glassworks, but we know that there are aspirations to get passenger services back on there, and we sought to account for that in the framework. So we would make sure that any new dwellings weren't going to impinge on the existing businesses and the railway line. We do recognise that there was a decision probably 10-15 years ago now that did create an issue for Premier Foods, but things have moved on considerably since then.
Great, thank you, Joe. Next question is about Natural England, so engagement with Natural England and their comments on these proposals. Can someone run through kind of engagement that we have had with stakeholders to date, particularly around environment? Is that one for Yang or Stacey or Joe?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that, so Natural England were consulted throughout the local plan process, so they knew exactly which sites were allocated. And similarly, we've known for a number of years about the SSSI designation, which we're incredibly excited about and proud of. We've worked very hard as a borough, and it goes back way beyond my time at Barnsley. But even since then, we've been working very closely with our partners, and the culmination of that work has been the designation. As I say, that designation was made in the knowledge of the local plan allocations, and similarly, in presenting the local plan to the inspector, we had full regard to any likely conflict with nearby habitats, regardless of, in some cases, regardless of designation. So yeah, that'll be fundamentally important. Some of the bird species aren't as sensitive to new development as you might think. That's certainly been the case when we've been talking about one of the master plans at Goldthorpe, close to Oldmoor, where we've been working very closely with the RSPB. But yeah, clearly it's going to be important that the relationship between the two doesn't prejudice the SSSI.
Thanks, Joe. Next question, comment is about the character of Carlton Village and the conservation area there, and maintaining that conservation area. Chris or Millie, one for you.
Yep, I can take this one first. Good question, thanks for that. And just want to point out townscape character assessment and heritage study is a very key part of our baseline evidence base stage, which some of the information or a lot of the studies were not really shown in this presentation, but we have gone through very thorough, robust assessments of the nearby conservation area as well as character, and it's definitely a very strong design cue for our placemaking framework. And I guess my question to be further clarified is whether how you see from this framework that is not picking up on that area or that element. Happy to further discuss that, or if you can further clarify that feedback. But from my point of view, I think we are definitely going to be very sensitive to local character and heritage, and in terms of building styles as well as residential parcel arrangement, they will all be set out and pick up heritage and character in further details in the design code.
Anything else to add from anybody? Right, okay, moving on. So road through to Spring Lane cannot sustain any more traffic. The road will go through the footpath leading to the school. How can this be justified as safe? Does anybody want to comment on this, or have we covered this off?
I'm not. Yeah, I can. Well, I'm not sure exactly which route through to Spring Lane we're talking about, and the road going through the footpath leading to the schools. I'm not quite sure exactly where we're talking about, but that as part of any detailed transport assessment, we will, you know, we will need to look at the routes the traffic is taking and assess the suitability of the routes and look at safe provision for all users, so you know, for people on the footpaths and for cyclists, so that you know, the scheme can be designed to be accessible for all and safe. So it will be something that will be picked up on more, you know, the more detailed planning process.
Yeah, so just to clarify then, Susie, that those detailed transport assessments will come as part of the planning applications in the future. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, and there'll be a requirement to make sure that, you know, there are safe routes to schools and you know, appropriate footpaths and crossing provision, and you know, that the interaction between pedestrians and vehicles is safe.
Yeah, so I guess that's a good point to say that this master plan framework is just setting out those principles for what then developers will then have to follow in the future. So any feedback you'd like to provide on what developers might need to consider as part of their planning applications, please do submit that feedback. So going on to the next question. So we have, why have Barnsley Council, even though it's been denied from the very top, removed our protest banners from private property, essentially theft and trespass? Regio, the tensions are already through the roof. We have good green space already, you're taking it away. Joe, I think this may be one for you.
Yeah, so the banners, I mean, it's news to me, but I can certainly say that on behalf of the planning department, I've not instructed anybody to remove any banners. Where as you'd expect, we do get banners that are put up that require advertisement consent, and consent has not been obtained. But in those circumstances, what we as the planning department would do is we would write to somebody and give them a set number of days to remove a banner, and if they don't, then we would take enforcement action. We wouldn't ordinarily just remove a banner. The only time that the council, as far as I'm aware of, that the council would remove banners is if they've been put on a highway structure and creating an immediate issue in terms of highway safety. Now, when I saw the question earlier, I did message my counterpart, the head of highways, and he wasn't aware that, well, he certainly wasn't aware of this and had not instructed anybody to remove any banners on any highway structures. So we're not denying that a council employee's not taking it upon themselves to remove a banner, but equally, I suppose you've got to remember that there are landowners who stand to benefit from this master plan, and you can't rule out a scenario where one of them took it upon themselves to remove it. So I'm sorry, I can't shed any light on it really. And then in terms of the other point, yeah, look, we accept that obviously there's a fair degree of frustration and concern around the master plan framework. It's the inevitability of the planning system, and as I said, we weren't doing this necessarily out of choice. We were doing it out of necessity because we do need to plan for the future of the borough in terms of economic growth, in terms of meeting future housing needs, but doing that in a way that obviously has regard to the whole range of environmental considerations.
Thanks, Joe. I think the next question is for you as well. So this is about emergency services. They're already strained, and this master plan framework can make things worse. Is that all right, Joe? Would you mind answering that, or is that something for Stacey?
Just in terms of, sorry, I was reading one of the other questions. Just say it again.
Yeah, it's about emergency services.
Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, so when we prepared the local plan, we had to do something called the infrastructure delivery plan. So that was to look at working with all infrastructure providers, including the emergency services, including utility providers, to look at, again, the cumulative impact of all the development in the local plan. So, for example, in the case of electricity, are we going to need substations upgrading? Is there going to be enough capacity in the foul sewage system, for example? So talking to Yorkshire Water about those types of issues, and we did exactly the same in terms of all the blue light services, and they fed back their responses. For health in particular, we've been working closely with the CCG throughout. For them, the issue is not so much about buildings, but it's about staff and having enough doctors and nurses. And obviously that's something that the way that the NHS is funded, it's based on population. So it's not for the planning system to provide contributions towards the NHS to offset the impact of development. Our role is really to make them aware of what's coming so that they can plan themselves to meet that future need. For other infrastructure, we do take contributions from developers to look at offsetting impacts. So, for example, provision of additional school places arising from there being more houses in the area. But for, I mean, we're happy to share our infrastructure delivery plan, because within there it explained what each of the blue light services, what the position was for them.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Next question is about railway lines and potentially a need for a new railway bridge, and railway line would need rebuilding again. So who would be responsible for this? I
can see that again. Yes, we're not proposing to do anything with the bridge at Shore Lane. We will obviously be having to look at that, because at the minute it's only single width, but the master plan's not proposing to do anything to that. I believe that the bridge you're talking about is the one to the south of the site, which was removed. That would only need to be reinstated if that whole section of what used to be the North Midland line, if that was reinstated, so where the old Cudworth railway station was, and then heading down towards Darfield. The problem with reinstating the whole of that line is that a lot of the old trackbed was built on at Manvers. So Rotherham built, for example, the next warehouse in Rotherham was on the old trackbed. So the focus for us at the minute, short term, is very much around the existing operational line between Ardaglass and Wakefield Kirkgate, and whether there is an opportunity to provide a train station within this area to serve the sort of Lundwood, West Green, Carlton, Cudworth area, with another station further north at Royston. But that would initially be for services running to Wakefield Kirkgate and to Leeds, so that people don't have to jump in their car, head towards Lee Lane and the A61 or the M1. Longer term, you know, whether they look again at reinstating the rest of the North Midland line between West Green and Swinton or Wath area of Rotherham, I think that's a much bigger project that would require land acquisition, demolitions, etc. So that's not really something that we're considering as part of this framework.
Thank you, Joe. So next question comment is about MU2 and MU3 and about creating a link to an urban Barnsley, which is discouraged by the MPPF and also appears to be reducing wildlife corridors and joining new developments together. It seems like this is going down a planning path. So Joe or Stacey, is this one for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, the idea, so when we did the local plan, we had to look at a number of options for where you might focus development, and those of you that will have seen the local plan will see that there's a settlement hierarchy in there, where the majority of growth is identified for what's termed urban Barnsley, and then the rest of it is distributed between what we're calling the 6 principal towns, which includes Cudworth, it includes Royston. And then you've got the villages, which have a much more modest level of growth attributed to them because they're generally more rural, less sustainable. And again, what the planning inspector was looking at is which strategy for how you might distribute development across Barnsley is going to be the most sustainable. So we did look at, for example, a new settlement, but new settlements are inherently difficult to deliver. All of Barnsley is surrounded by green belt, so any new settlement would have been in the green belt. There's a range of obviously environmental designations, flood risk, a whole host of factors that led us to not pursue a new settlement. And similarly, that more dispersed pattern of development where you might send more development towards the villages. Again, had we pursued that, the planning inspector would have said actually there's a more sustainable alternative, which is to focus your development on your existing settlements, because what that will do is it will encourage the regeneration and renewal of those settlements, particularly some of the local and district centres where we've seen already in some parts of the borough where there's been recent housing development. You've seen a little bit of a renaissance in those local communities in terms of shops, bars, other facilities. And we would expect something similar as a result of Carlton that we would see certainly in Royston. You'll see some of the local pubs, restaurants, etc. Up in Cudworth as well. You should see obviously the benefits of that increased spending power, and that will be key in terms of the borough's ongoing economic strategy. So yeah, we considered the whole host of alternatives for how you might disperse development across the borough. But what we were keen to do, and what the Greenbelt Review ensured, was that the gaps between those towns, so urban Barnsley in the 6 principal towns, would preserve those gaps as much as possible, which meant that, for example, the MU1 site close to junction 37, that's effectively infilling a gap between Higham, Bark Green, Redbrook, Pogmore and Gorber. And we fully understand why those people might think, well, that's contrary to Greenbelt policy. But the reality is that all those settlements were within urban Barnsley. So that was seen as infilling as opposed to joining 2 separate towns, which is what we seek to avoid with Greenbelt. So, for example, the gap between the northern part of this site and the Royston area, that gap would remain as an important as an important green belt, strip of green belt between the principal town of Royston and urban Barnsley. And similarly, you've got important gaps to the east of the railway line between what's urban Barnsley and what's Cudworth's principal town.
Great. Okay, next question's about the SSI and how the wildlife area and the transit routes for it are being mitigated for. So Yanyi, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I can take that one. So we have actually engaged with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and spoken to them about the Masterplan Framework, and we've also spoken to them about what the best enhancement or creation of habitat types would be within the Masterplan Framework to help the species that are supported within Carlton Nature Reserve. So it is a case of working closely with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and gaining an understanding of the best habitat types that would serve for the species that are supported within the Carlton Marsh area, and how we could actually provide similar types of habitats and buffer areas within the Masterplan Framework itself.
Thanks, Yanyi. Next question, comment. You can appreciate that there is some great reservation after the destruction we've seen in Hoyland. How will you dispel our fears? So I think Stacey or Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to note with Hoyland is at the minute is obviously that was a proposal for a 400,000 square foot employment unit with car parking and a bypass. So what you've seen, that's Hoyland West, and then Hoyland North, which is the one between Hoyland Common and Birdwell on the hill. That's Harworth Estates, and again they're preparing that for commercial use. And so what's happened on those two sites is you've obviously seen, firstly, the market for commercial buildings is relatively buoyant at the minute. So they've obviously done it in tandem, which has increased the cumulative impact on the landscape while these two sites are under construction. But because they're catering for larger units, they're developing a lot of land in one go, where what you find with residential development is that yeah, there's 2,000 houses earmarked for this area, but that would happen in a much more gradual and much more gentle way. So you're only ever going to get so many units selling off a particular site in a given year. So whilst we understand that, 15 years down the line, this area is going to look very different because all things being equal, the development will be complete. You're not going to get that immediate impact that you've seen at Hoyland as a result of, having to do groundworks to accommodate very large buildings.
Thanks, Joe. Right, next question. So just comment, I think, Joe, the banners were removed from residents' private dwellings, and the banners have been returned after the matter was reported to the police. I think that's just one for you to know. Right, in the next comment, by strain, I meant understaffed and more people. I think that was in reference to the emergency services. Just scrolling up to the emergency service question. Yeah, already strained. I think you talked about the IDP, the infrastructure delivery plan there, which does that consider resourcing as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the situation at Barnsley Hospital is, yeah, we're aware of that, but in part it's down to the pandemic. But what I can say is that we're speaking to the CCG on a regular basis. They understand what's potentially coming in terms of housing growth and where that's dispersed across the borough. They then speak to the local GP practices, who will then look at if they need to recruit another general practitioner or another nurse or what have you. So, and those are ongoing discussions. We do meet them on a regular basis.
Okay, next question we have. So who are Arup and how will they be involved with any further proposed developments? Millie, can you explain, please?
Happy to. So Arup, some of us work for, and then Gillespie's, we're both design consultants, and we're working on behalf of the NBC at the moment to design the master plan framework to look at the current evidence base and to make sure there's one joined up proposal for the whole allocation, to make sure that we think about the green infrastructure, the drainage, and kind of the character and transport all in one, as opposed to separate landowners bringing forward their own land that they own. After we've done the master plan framework, we're not anticipating being involved in the future, and any future planning applications will be brought forward by landowners and developers on those separate sites. But then this as Joe explained earlier, this master plan framework will be there with the local plan to help evaluate those planning applications. I don't know if that was good, and if you need to add anything else, Joe or Stacey.
I think that's it, Millie. Just explain who Arup are. That's fine. Next question. So can an FOI request be made to see all of this evidence we're talking about? Stacey?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Katie. An FOI is not necessary. If you want any further information or to be signposted or sent copies of any evidence-based documents, just email master planning mailbox and I'll try and get them to you.
And I will just pop that up on screen right now as well. So that's this one at the bottom. So the master planning at barnsley.gov.uk. Next question. Why are you talking about as if 2,000 houses are going to be built? The council's told us there's room for change. Joe, Stacey.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, the 2,000 is obviously what's earmarked in the local plan. But and at the minute, the master plan, the proposals in this consultation seek to make allowance for that number. But I was obviously party to discussions where we said we would be willing to look at that, and we still are. This site differed to some of the others because about 600 of those 2,000 units we weren't anticipating coming forward until after 2033. So it gives you an idea of what I was talking about in terms of this being a much more gradual development than the kind of the scenario that's played out at the minute at Hoyland. Because 600 of those aren't within the local plan period, it does give us a little bit more flex on this site than it does on some of the others. So for example, the MU1 site. So you know, obviously, the decision on whether to adopt a master plan framework is ultimately going to be one for the council, the whole of the council, all the elected members. And so if the consultation responses identify issues which mean that 2,000 isn't achievable, and if the technical work that we're doing also suggests that, then we wouldn't rule out reducing that number.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Last question, I think not directly related to this master plan framework, but this person has reported to Premier Foods about an HGV, probably it sounds like dangerous driving. Can we advise Premier Foods about using the bypass?
Yeah, but if you want to send if you're saying that the HGVs are using alternative routes on the local network instead of the bypass, then if you could just let us know which routes they're using, we can certainly bring that to their attention, and if it is feasible for them to be using the bypass instead, then we would ask that they do that.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop it there. Just a reminder again that there are some topical sessions coming up. So if you feel like you still have a few more questions, please do sign up to one of these. And please do also submit your feedback. But other than that, thank you for joining today.